All right, so thank you everyone for joining us today for the E-Rate Fundamentals webinar. Today we have with us from E-Rate Central, Andrew Epting, who is going to go over E-Rate fundamentals for us. Andrew, if you'd like to take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, all. Thank you for attending today. We will dive right on in, and I will be respectful of your time, and we'll try and get done and have plenty of time at the end for questions. That being said, I'm very informal. If you have a question, you are more than welcome to throw it in the chat or just pipe up and ask away, and I will be happy to address it if I can. So with that being said, let's, all right, there we go. So I love history. I'm a history buff. Got my degree in history, and so I oftentimes like to incorporate quotes that I love. And so this one stood out to me, and I hope I'm not going to lose everybody after seeing this, but there is a reason. So Winston Churchill once said, I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat. We have before us many long months of toil and struggle, and I think many people who've experienced or had to work with E-Rate probably feel that way. But I do want you all to be assured that together we'll get through this. And E-Rate is complicated. E-Rate can be difficult. Very well aware of that. But you do have great resources in the state of Michigan with not only the state education network and the E-Rate coordinators there, but the library in Michigan as well. And so I will say that puts the state of Michigan, especially the libraries, in a different position than other states where there is a cohesive network of support. So with that being said, let's go ahead and just jump on into this. So this is part of a series of webinars we're going to do. I was very excited that we could go ahead and get these all on the calendar and planned out. So today we're doing step one, if you want to call it that, E-Rate fundamentals. In October, we'll talk about procurement next month. Procurement is probably one of the most important aspects of the E-Rate program. So we will spend a lot of time on it. I wanted to have it to be a standalone, separate webinar. And it'll be timely too, as in that is the point in time where I think many libraries should be getting their procurement stuff taken care of. And then next, step three, during the January time frame, we're going to be filing the Form 471. Again, very timely. That's when we expect the E-Rate filing window to open. And then before we get to the last one, around mid-February, we're going to do a group therapy session. If any libraries, we don't have anything specific to discuss during this webinar. What this will be is a good opportunity for libraries to share what they're seeing from an application filing perspective. If there is any new information that we can provide at that time, we will do so. But really, this is just an opportunity for you guys, for us to get together and share what's working and what's not working. And it'll be an opportunity for me to kind of help play some interference on, hey, are you having an issue? Are you having a problem? And so then lastly, way in the future, which April will be here before you know it, right? We'll talk about post-commitment stuff. So what do you expect after you filed your Form 471 and you're waiting on the process of getting your application funded and getting that project started? So I hope that you will all join us. I know Becky and Shannon will be sending out these links for registration in the future. But go ahead and just pencil them in on your calendar because we'd love to have you join as well. Okay, so today we're going to talk about a couple of things, primarily the E-Rate fundamentals. I do go into, as is the step one, especially for folks who are new to the program, who are trying to get probably refreshed with some new stuff. We'll talk about the E-Rate timeline. I think that's pretty important because it can get kind of hairy, but we'll take it slowly, okay? And then, like I said, questions at the end, but you are more than welcome to ask me a question anytime during today's webinar. The following slides are high level. I'm not expecting you guys to know this or it be something that you really need to focus on. I'm providing this really as a reference, okay? When we get to the meat of this presentation, then I'll tell you, okay, this is what you got to know. So at a very high level overview of the E-Rate program, it's one of the 4 Universal Service Fund programs, okay? The schools and libraries quote unquote, in parentheses, E-rate program is the largest. And it is there with the Rural Health Care Program, Lifeline, and High Cost. Funding for the Universal Service Fund and by way of schools and libraries E-rate program is generated by a surcharge on all carrier telecom services. So when you pay your phone bill, for example, there is a little USF charge on there that goes to fund the program. Let's talk about the E-rate players at a very high level. The first and foremost is the Federal Communications Commission, Universal Service Administrative Company, also called USAC. I will use USAC almost exclusively as a acronym. There are a couple of these other entities below here, and we'll talk very, very high level about who these folks are. And then lastly, you guys, the applicant community, comprised of schools, libraries, and then consortia of schools and libraries. So the Federal Communications Commission is a delegated authority, legal authority for the USF program. So anytime we're talking about the E-rate program, the laws for which this program are being laid out are coming from the Federal Communications Commission. Documents that we oftentimes will reference, for example, the eligible services list, the legal document from the Federal Communications Commission. That's common. Within the FCC, the Wireline Competition Bureau is the office or agency, so to speak, that is really the kind of the administrator. Although that's where all the lawyers are at. That's who's folks who are going to be determining how the program is administered. But the folks that we interface on a daily basis is going to be this company, USAC. It's a private company. They are a contractor to the FCC to manage the E-rate program. There are a couple of their subcontractors, Maximus, Sutherland, and then Cotton Company and KPMG. These are not really that important to know. Again, it's just an idea, give you an idea of who are the other parties who are involved in this in the E-rate program. When you file an E-rate application, and you get someone who will reach out to you, for example, through PIA, you're talking with someone who is from Maximus, usually. When you call USAC's customer service number, you are talking with someone who is from Sutherland. I keep wanting to say Sutherland Communications, that's not it. And then these last two here, for example, and there are a couple other ones. These are the most common ones. There are these third-party auditors. In the event that you ever get audited for E-rate applications, these are some of the companies that may reach out to you to conduct that audit. From the applicant community, as I mentioned earlier, the public and private libraries that serve eligible populations are who we're talking about. Schools will be important here in just a few minutes for you guys, and I'll explain why that is. But there are some others. Other entities that are affiliated or involved in the E-rate program. For example, one of which that I'm a part of is that State E-rate Coordinators Alliance. I was the State E-rate Coordinator for South Carolina, and now I share that role with Joe Polasek up in Michigan. So I'm happy to represent you all in that regard. As well as ALA, and then I mentioned the organization earlier, Shelby, the Schools, Healthcare, and Libraries Broadband Association. So other entities that are involved, tangentially partly involved in the E-rate program, who just want to give you an idea of. So E-rate in Michigan, you guys are doing pretty well. As of the last 3 or 4 years, well, yeah, since 2019, Michigan libraries have received about $7.74 million in E-rate funding. Which is pretty good compared to your neighbors in Wisconsin. That's a lot more, almost by double. You're just a slight hair above your other neighbors in Ohio, and I didn't have time to look at what Illinois was. But you guys in Michigan are doing well, especially in the library community. But we do have some areas that we can improve on. As of right now, there is about 126 libraries or library systems that don't participate in the E-rate program. And so at some point in time, I'd like to see if we can address that and figure out what's going on there. And if you are a library who's on the call today who does not currently participate in the E-rate program, then I'm hoping that this will help change that trajectory. All right, diving on in, E-rate fundamentals. The E-rate program reimburses eligible applicants the discounted cost of eligible products and services. That's the best, I think, most concise way of explaining what the E-rate program is. And when we talk about that, we can break that down into four real fundamental elemental parts, right? We're talking about eligibility, discounts. So there's going to be a little bit of math in here, but I'm a history major. I can do it. You guys can do it. We'll talk about forms. We did speak a moment ago when I was going through kind of the webinar series of a couple of numbers like the Form 470, the Form 471. Those are examples of the forms that we're going to be talking about, and they're very important. And then lastly, we will spend a few minutes talking about something I don't think probably gets talked about enough, and that's compliance. Compliance, the E-rate program is notoriously a very challenging program where I's have to be dotted and T's have to be crossed. And so we'll help you understand what those compliance aspects are. First, eligibility. Okay. Students, again, we know your libraries. You don't teach students in a formal setting like that. We know you guys, libraries do reach out and engage with students, obviously. But elementary and secondary students receiving elementary and secondary education as determined by state law. That's very important. It seems kind of redundant, but that is exactly who it is. College students, no. In some states, adult education, no. I think in Michigan, yes. I have to go back and double check that. But library patrons, there is no library patron specific eligibility factor. So anyone who is in your library area service territory, regardless of their age, is considered an eligible entity, an eligible user, eligible population. Eligible entities. So you have to have, in order for E-rate to get E-rate funding, you have to have an eligible population, an eligible entity, and then we'll talk about the eligible services as well. So for libraries, any public or private library, as defined by the Museum and Library Services Act of 2018, and has to be also eligible for assistance from the LSTA, must be eligible to receive funds from the state library administrative agency, so Library of Michigan, as well as LSTA funding. And then more recently, tribal libraries have recently been included officially as eligible entities in the E-rate program. They have been in the past, but it was more of they were kind of officially looped in this past year, which was a good thing. Okay. When we talk about the eligible entities, we're thinking about some specific types of buildings, right? A non-instructional facility, a library branch, your main library branch, or your main library, I should say, excuse me, and then bookmobiles. Now, I know in the state of Michigan, bookmobiles are considered annexes of the main library usually. But a non-instructional facility, if you are at all, and I see this down here in South Carolina quite a bit, where we'll have a library system be really aligned with the county office or county government, for example. And if the library, if your library has any, if the internet service goes through the county office, for example, then we can make that county office an eligible entity, and we can still maintain E-rate compliance. So a non-instructional facility is going to be, we call it a NIF, really, NIF, and that's going to be an example of that. Would be for a library. The best example I can think of is going to be where like a county office, or it could be a university office building. If you're like I said, usually it's going to be where your internet service is going to come through that building. Okay. Okay. Eligible services. There are two categories of service for E-rate. Category one is going to be the product and services that are your telecommunications, data transmission, and internet service. Okay. Internet access and data transmission. Lease lit fiber. Lease lit fiber is going to be your standard commodity based wide area network, right? So you have your main branch, and then you have your 2 or 3 branches across the county, right, or across the township, or however you're broken up. And there's going to be a connection, a wide area network connection between all those buildings, and that's what we call, least lit fiber. Least dark fiber is going to be is another option for libraries, and then a couple other ones. For the vast majority, the two services that we see libraries in Michigan applying for are going to be those first two: internet access and data transmission, and least lit fiber. Now, in parts that are very rural, they may not have access to a bunch of service providers. A least dark fiber or even a self-provisioned broadband network is a viable option. So those are examples of Category 1 product and services. Again, think the telecommunications side, the actual internet service, or the fiber in the ground to connect your library branches. Okay. Now, the second category, Category 2, these are going to be things that are inside your building for the most part. Think of your access points and routers, everything inside your library branch that actually can propagate out that internet signal, okay? Within the Category 2 products and services, the Category 2 aspect of E-Rate, there are three, call them subcategories, call them service types, for example. The first one, internal connections. The second one there is basic maintenance of internal connections. We call it BMIC for short. And then the last one there, managed internal broadband services, MIBS for short, okay? So for internal connections, come on. All right, this is gonna be your hardware. Antennas, connectors, cabling, caching servers, firewalls. Now, if you guys aren't 100% sure what all this stuff is, for example, like a caching server, don't worry about it. We can. I've got a resource, some resources at the end of the slide that can kind of help provide some additional information. Firewalls, racks and shelving, things of that nature. Routers, switches. We call these UPS, uninterruptible power supply, and then battery backup. This is going to be something like a battery that's going to actually, be used to make sure that your firewall is always up and running, or your switch is always up and running, and even in the event of a power outage, power failure. Lastly, access points. I think that's all I have on there. Yep. But so just going back there, so these are the Category 2 products and services that are eligible under the internal connections aspect of Category 2. Does that make sense to everybody? Please feel free to ask questions because I'll take a second to ask if everybody's got any questions before I move to the next two. All right. So the other two subcategories, if you will, under Category 2 is going to be basic maintenance, or also known as MIBS. I'm sorry, BMIC, excuse me. And these are going to be services provided by a third-party company, service provider, who's going to maintain and provide technical support for your network. Usually we'll see this considered, if you have to do any type of maintenance to your network, or even change it, move stuff around, stuff like that. That's what would fall under here. And then managed internal broadband services, MIBS, is going to be qualified as any service provided, again, by a third-party service provider that's going to monitor and manage your network. And these are, not as common that I see libraries request, but if you are a library system that has very limited technical resources, folks on staff to manage your network or monitor your network, this might be a very good option for your library in terms of, utilizing your Category 2 budget to pay for those services. I get oftentimes get asked what's not eligible. From a Category 1 perspective, your voice services, those were phased out back in 2015. DDoS. DDoS is distributed denial of service. This is going to be, where hackers are trying to, flood your network with a whole bunch of traffic to shut you down, right? Many internet service providers provide this to libraries and schools, for example, but they do so at a cost. And so if that's the case, we have to kind of cost allocate it out. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, that has to be cost allocated out. And then lastly, content filtering. Content filtering is an ineligible cost or service under the E-rate program, even though content filtering is required by the program. More on that if you're interested. Under category 2, here are some things that are not eligible that I get asked often if they are. So desktops and laptops, printers, servers like a data server. Now, I mentioned earlier the caching server. Caching server is a completely different thing than a storage server because it's just caching. A caching server is going to be caching website pages and documents and things that are internal to your network. And so you don't have to go out to the internet to go grab that document or content, whatever it happens to be. It lives on your network in this cache box. Security systems, cameras, and then any hardware or any hardware essentially from banned companies such as Huawei. So there is a law that was passed about 2 years ago, I think. It's the National Technology Safety something or another, and any company that's been listed on this list of banned companies, you cannot purchase that equipment. And they just added to that list just the other day. Okay. Oh, let's see. I got a chat. Let's see. Okay. The question, a very good question. Okay, is priority 1 the same as category 1? In the olden days, it kind of was. Priority 1 was when it was the internet, internet telecommunication services. However, when the E-rate program before 2015, before the modernization orders, stuff like that, they had limited funding. Okay. And what they would do is they would have priority 1 services, or I'm sorry, priority 1 services were funded to the libraries and school districts that had the highest discount rate, which we'll talk about here in a bit. If there were funds that were left over, then they went to priority 2, and those were going to be your internal connection stuff, and that was also, prioritized based on your discount. But good question. All right. So discount. Oh, we're almost there. We're halfway there with the presentation, and we're doing good on time, so that's good too. All right. Thank you, Bon Jovi. All right, discounts. The amount of E-rate funding an applicant receives is based on the applicant's discount percentage, okay? Again, this is stuff that you don't necessarily need to know how, like you don't need to know it backwards and forwards, but just kind of having a conceptual idea of, okay, how does this work? I think will help you be more comfortable with the E-rate program. So in order to determine the discount percentage, the applicant, the library, I should say, must calculate the income percentage, which is calculated by taking the total number of full-time students and dividing it by the total number of full-time students who qualify for the NSLP program, National School Lunch Program. And again, you guys are asking me, Andrew, we don't have students, we don't feed students. What's the point? What gives? In the E-rate program, wherever your main library is located, right? In that school district where that main library is located is the school district that the library will assume, okay? And they will use that discount rate for the library. So if a school district's population changes or the economic dynamics of that school district, their population is changing, that change could impact the library as well. So the library is tied to the school district for their discount. An example of one of my clients, Clinton Macomb Library, they are what was it? Chippewa Valley Schools is the school district that particular school district or that library system uses for their discount. So here you go. Total number of students divided by the total number of students qualify for NSLP, right? Now, it's important to note, this is an income percentage number. We're going to take this number, right? And then we're going to figure out, let me just go ahead and go on down here. we're going to figure out which one it falls in this discount matrix. And we'll have an example here in just a second. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply the income percentage to the discount matrix that I've got up here on the screen and determine, whether it's the category 1 or category 2 percentage. And as I mentioned a moment ago, libraries adopt the school district's discount percentage. So even though the libraries don't need to know exactly, like I said earlier, how to calculate a discount percentage, knowing why it is what it is and if it may change is important for you guys to understand. Okay. You'll also notice that you've got an urban and rural discount. It changes slightly based on your urban or rural status. Okay. So let's use an example. All right. A rural school district with 5,000 students, of which 4,250 qualify for NSLP, would have a category 1 discount of 90%, right? The math here and why that does 85%, I'll show you here in just a second. So you take that number and you're going to plug it into the thing. So you'll take, 5,000 divided by 4,250, that equals 85%. So I'm pointing at my screen as if y'all can see this, I'm sorry. So if you come down here, you go over to the income column, right? Okay. And then that 85% is going to be that last row. And then there you go. And like I said, the rural aspect is important because, well, not that important, I guess. If it was an urban school district, it would still be 90%. If it was a 60%, if you go up to, you'll see there's a little bit of a difference there. So, other thing to note that the discount percentages are different slightly for either category 1 or category 2. So just make that connection there. All right. I think I've already said this, but I think it's probably worth repeating. So the discount percentage is used to determine how much E-rate funding is available to applicants, okay, such as libraries. To determine the amount of funding that's available to applicants for a particular product or service, you're going to multiply the product or service by the discount percentage. Okay. So if you've got, I think I actually have an example. Do I have an example? Yeah. So the rural school district in this example has a 90% discount percentage. They receive their internet service totals $10,000 a year, okay? What you're going to do is you're going to take that $10,000, multiply it by 90%, and you're going to get 9,000 bucks. Oh, whoa, sorry. So the portion that the E-rate program will reimburse this particular school district is $9,000. The $1,000 that is not reimbursed, we call that the non-discounted share, and that's a term I'll use. It's pretty common that we'll use that term in the E-rate program, but that non-discounted share or local share or applicant share, if you want to call it that, that's the portion that's not reimbursed under the E-rate program. Okay. Let's talk specifically about category 2 budgets. So before I do that, I think it's important to note that category 1, there is no budget, so to speak. If your library system, if you need to purchase internet service and that internet service provider tells you that you need $100,000 to pay for that fiber to go from A to B, okay? You can apply for that, right? And you can apply for that full $100,000 in your E-rate application. There's no cap to what you can apply for, right? As long as it's cost effective, right? And the category 2 budgets aspect, it's a little bit different because you are capped, right? And you have a 5-year cap, or a 5-year budget, to say. So you get this category 2 budget and you have 5 years to use it, okay? So libraries can calculate their category 2 budget by multiplying the total square footage of all branches and then just multiplying it by $4.50. Pretty simple. What that's going to give you, that rate, is what we call a pre-discount amount. So let's say example here, you've got a very large library system, right? Or school, yeah, the library system, yeah. let's say all branches, total square footage comes to 420,000 square feet. We're going to multiply that by $4.50. You get a pre-discount category 2 budget of $1.89 million. Okay, a lot of money. Most libraries that we see are going to be much smaller than this. There is a floor. So if your library is of a certain size, let's say, for example, it's below, I want to say it's like 700 square feet or something like that. I can't recall exactly what it is. You'll qualify for the minimum, right? And so that's going to be $25,000. The funding floor, if you will, is $25,000. So all libraries, regardless of how large or how small they are, I should say, will qualify for $25,000. Now, mind you, this is a pre-discount budget. What you would do next is just what we did for the category 1. Okay, we're going to take that $1.89 million and we're going to multiply it by 85%. Right, that was their category 2 discount amount, right? And so that means that the portion of this fund of this funding right here, the library would be reimbursed is $1.6 million. Okay. The non-discounted portion, library share, for example, is the remainder, the $283,000. I hope that makes sense. I hope that's easy to conceptualize. It kind of, again, it's a lot of numbers, and I apologize, but hopefully that's helpful. Any questions? Okay. Oh, let's see, I got one. Okay, category 2 budget calculated the same for schools. Yes. Well, I say that. I'm sorry. For schools, it is calculated in the same way, but they use a different metric. It's the number of students, and they multiply it by $167. So it's $167 per student is the pre-discount, that's the category 2 budget amount. Yep, good question. All right. Yes. So your category 2 budget refreshes every 5 years. And the next refresh cycle is coming up soon. We're about almost there, actually, 25-26, funding year 25-26. So you have between now and then to utilize your available category 2 budget. It doesn't roll over, I should also mention. Okay. E-rate forms. The fun stuff, okay? So the first form that most applicants interact with is going to be the Form 470, also known as the procurement form. And this is where you're going to seek bids from qualified vendors for the requested E-rate eligible products and services, okay? We're going to talk very high level about these forms, but when we do our follow-on webinars, we're going to go into a lot more detail right here. So I'm just going to give you just a taste of what these forms are about, but when we do our later presentations or webinars, we'll go into much detail. One of the key compliance aspects of the Form 470 is that it must be available to all vendors, prospective bidders, I should say, for at least 28 days. That's a program rule. We oftentimes see applicants get hung up on that, where they receive a bid afterwards and they don't review it, or they pull bids too soon, or what have you. And so it is a very procurement is a very key aspect of the E-rate program. Once the form is certified, it can't really be changed. In some respects it can be, but you may have to file a new Form 470. The reason I put in here about the timing is that I want you all as libraries, I want you guys to all be thinking about, let's go ahead and start doing our procurement, and we'll do the timelines here next, where you'll see where this all kind of comes together. But understand that there is a sense of timing, a cadence of timing that does apply to this. Okay. The next form that an applicant is going to be working with is called the Form 471, or the application form. And this is an applicant's opportunity to take what they received from a bid, right? So they filed a Form 470, they've received bids back, they evaluated them, they've selected a vendor, and they're going to now say, okay, let's take that bid and we're going to just key it into a Form 471, right? And so we're taking all that information from our procurement and we're just going to be putting it and keying it into our Form 471. And that Form 471 is going to be your application to USAC for that funding, okay? The Form 471 must be certified by the application filing window deadline. We don't know what it is. It'll be announced sometime around early January. Usually, and Office Pool that we've got going on, I'm saying it'll open sometime on January like 14th or 16th or something like that. It'll be sometime mid-January, and it'll usually close around mid to late March. So you have a good amount of time to do it, to get your application submitted and certified. But we do live and die by deadlines in the E-rate program. So please take note. Okay. Yeah, we don't need to go into that. All right. The next form that an applicant will see is the SIPA form, the Form 486. And it does two things. It certifies to USAC that the library is compliant with SIPA, the Children's Internet Protection Act. Libraries, I know, that does apply to libraries as well. Some libraries do participate in the E-rate program because of it. Some choose to not participate in the E-rate program because of it as well. So that is up to your library system, but all libraries who are participating and receiving funding for services have to be SIPA compliant. There are dates for which this form must be certified. For example, once you get your FCDL, your funding commitment decision letter, you have 120 days to get that thing filed. And this is where, again, we do see some libraries get hung up. They think once it's a false thought, but it's at least what's going on is a library will submit an application and think that's it, that it's done. They're just waiting on the money. Well, no, there's still some stuff you have to get done before you go, before you can receive this funding. And this is an example of that, the Form 486. Okay.
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah.
Can we jump back? Leanne had a question regarding the 470.
I see it. Thank you. Yes.
You're welcome.
Do you have to do a Form 470 every year? No. If you have a multi-year contract, which I highly recommend. I prefer multi-year contracts. If you have a multi-year contract, you don't have to do a Form 470 every year. You would have to do a Form 471, right? So if you want to receive funding, you have to at least file an application every year, an annual Form 471 application. Here's an example. You get an internet service contract with a vendor, and it's a 3-year contract. Okay, so you file that Form 470 once. It's good for the term of that contract, the 3 years. You would, however, you will need to file that Form 471 application each year, all 3 years. Just because you have a 3-year Form 470 doesn't mean that you automatically have a 3-year Form 471. We tried to argue that once in one of the Notice of Proposed rulemakings, and it was kind of shot down, unfortunately. Okay, yep, all right, good. I'm glad that made sense. All right. Okay. One of the more important ones, the Form 472, is the BEAR form. So BEAR, we love acronyms, being it is government, the Billed Entity Applicant Reimbursement. And this is going to be a case where you're purchasing your internet service and you're paying 100% of the cost. And then once your application is funded and all that kind of stuff, you then go and you submit an invoice, a BEAR, to USAC, and they're going to reimburse you for your 80% or 90%, what have you. And this is fairly common. I recommend that applicants use the BEAR form for things such as internet service, anything dealing with your telecommunications, any monthly charges. Use the BEAR form. Don't have to, but you should. That's my recommendation. And then this is additional stuff that we don't really need to get into right now. And then here's the second one. Here's the other option. The Form 474, or the SPI, Service Provider Invoicing. And this is a good option for applicants and libraries who may be undertaking a very large Category 2 project and may not be able to swing the $500,000 invoice cost. So what happens here is you work this out ahead of time with your vendor. And what the vendor is going to do is once the project's complete or ready for invoicing, the vendor is going to just submit to you a discounted invoice, and that discount will be based on what your non-discounted share is. So in the example that we showed earlier about the internet service, for example, I think it was easy numbers. It was $10,000 was the total cost of the internet service, and this was a 90% district, right? And so in that example, the internet service provider would send a bill, an invoice to the library or to the school district for just $1,000. And then the vendor would take care of getting the reimbursement, the $9,000 from USAC directly. So it just shifts that administrative burden from the library or school to the service provider. I won't, there's really no positive or negative con or pro for either one of them. If you're doing the SPI, I would recommend, again, using this one for your category 2 stuff or anything that's going to be like a non-recurring cost. Again, because it does provide that flexibility from a financing perspective. Okay. The last one is not one that'll be that common. It's called the Form 500. I call it the multi-purpose form, and it does it does everything. It's a Swiss Army's knife of forms, if you want to call it that. But you can adjust contract expiration dates. If you need to cancel or reduce the amount of a funding request number, you can do that there. A whole bunch of other stuff that you can do. Also, one that is timely for many libraries, or for many applicants to say, you can use this form to request a service delivery deadline extension. So why I say that's timely is that every year you have a service delivery deadline for non-recurring services. And it just so happens that the one that's coming up is coming up next week, November 30th. Is a service delivery deadline for many applications. And if you haven't got your stuff, if you haven't gotten your equipment installed or what have you, you need to make sure you file that that request, that deadline extension before the 30th. Okay. Yep. All right. So this is the time we'll talk about timelines, I should say. That doesn't make sense. I've got two formats for timeline here. I have one that is more linear and then one that's circular, and I hope that in doing so you might find one that works best for you. As it says here, the E-rate timeline is a bit complex, okay, and deadlines are absolute. There's very little flexibility, and if you do miss something, you have to go appeal to the FCC, for example. It's just you don't want to get there. Applicants are regularly working in 3 or more funding years. You'll see why that's the case here in a bit. Where applicants, and I'll say libraries, are constantly planning, conducting procurement, for example, in 2023, responding to review inquiries on a 2022 application, and then perhaps maybe even requesting reimbursement for a FY 2021 purchase, for example. So organization is going to be your friend, and yeah, let's go ahead and just dive right on in. So here's your E-rate timeline. Looks pretty simple, right? I like to do procurement and or planning now, right? Anytime between July and November, let's start thinking about what it is we want to apply for. What do we need? Can we afford it? All that kind of stuff. Between the months of December through the end of March, well, really the end of, March is when you're going to be doing your procurement, right? Issuing your bids, reviewing stuff, filing that Form 470, for example. December to March is going to be the ideal time to do that. But I will tell you, do not wait. Don't wait, because as the closer we get to the middle of end of March, when applications have to be submitted, I will say I've had examples where vendors get tired. They get wore out, and the later you wait in a filing window, you get worse bids, or you may not get as many bids as you normally would. The early bird in this example gets the worm. You can see I've got there those 2 call outs, if you will. Usually you want to certify your Form 470 no later than X day in February. We don't have that date yet. It will be announced. But when we do, it'll be sometime around mid to late February. And then again, you're certifying that Form 470 sometime in mid to late March. So let's add some stuff to it though. you're doing the exact same thing, right? But we're incorporating an additional year, right? So I've denoted the stuff from the prior year in that dark blue, or I'm sorry, that navy blue color. But now all of a sudden we've got to start over. We've got this aquamarine teal color, if you will, which we've added in here. Okay, so you can see from last year. Okay, July services start. You might get a funding commitment decision letter at least by the end of September. You have a 486 deadline. So you can see you've got some stuff in here, but you've got to come in here and now you're adding in the Form 470 aspect again if you're going to apply for it again. So it is something that can get kind of hairy, and of course you'll see why. So you add a third year. Now you're dealing with invoice deadlines, invoice deadline extensions, and so that is again, some people like me prefer looking at a timeline such as this. Linear, I like it. It makes sense. However, I understand not everybody's like that. Here is a timeline that you could pretty much use for any funding year. All the same elements are there. From November to March is an ideal time to be doing your procurement. Earlier the better. March to June or July, you've got your Form 471 review. Oh, I missed one. I'm sorry. July to November. Yes, I'm sorry. July to November, you're doing your procurement planning. And then November to March, your actual procurement, getting those Form 470s out there, evaluating bids. And along the way, you have key deadlines. For example, your invoice deadline. When do services start? When do services end? Hope that's helpful. We're almost there. Compliance, my favorite topic, particularly document retention. So if you're not familiar with the E-rate program and its compliance aspect, document retention is perhaps the most important one. All applicants and even your service providers are required to retain all E-rate related documents for at least 10 years from the last date of service. And that is the law. So if you are, so the stuff that you're dealing with this year, for example, let's say you start let's use the example that was mentioned a moment ago, a 3-year service contract for your internet service provider. That document retention not only includes the 10 years, right, but it's from the last date of service. So you've got 3 years on that contract. So for documentation on that 3rd year of a contract, that's when the clock starts for that contract. So it could be 13 years that you need to have that documentation in place. That's what that last date of service means. Things that you need to be retaining: purchase orders, invoices, proof of payment, proof of reimbursement, everything. Anything that E-rate touches, please keep. You can keep it in a digital form or in a hard copy form. USAC really doesn't care as long as you can have access to it. And the other little bits of wisdom I will say that I've heard USAC say in the past, and from an auditing perspective, is you can say, oh, well, yeah, we had that form, but we lost it. Well, that's all fine and well, but if you can't produce it, it does not exist. And they take that position very, very, very seriously. So I think there's one more thing. The important one. Yeah, asset inventories. So for your category 2 stuff, and to a lesser degree, your category 1, your internet service, but for your category 2, keeping asset inventories, records of your maintenance and warranty, stuff like that, that's something you're going to want to keep as well. Libraries are already probably doing this. You guys deal with a lot of devices, equipment. Libraries aren't just books anymore. I know that for a fact. Libraries are much more, and so you guys are likely already doing this to some extent. But I will offer one little bit of advice. With your asset inventories or your tagging, I should say, asset tagging. Oftentimes, I recommend that if you have those little aluminum stickers, or it might even be like a zip tie on the device, or whatever happens to be. If it's white or whatever color it may be, I would recommend choosing a different color tag for your E-rate stuff. So if your normal regular printer, for example, has a white tag on it, right? That's not E-rate eligible. But then your switch or a access point or something else is purchased under E-rate. Give it a red or an orange or a pink, whatever, and something that's different and stands out. So you can your IT folks can quickly see it and recognize it as, hey, don't move that. That's got E-rate associated with it. Okay, so just a word to the wise, or at least a recommendation there. Okay, let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. I had this wanted to. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up a little bit. When it comes to SIPA compliance, one of the things that will trip up a library when it comes down to an audit is the content filtering aspect, okay? So really focus on that second bullet point there. I want you guys to archive your content filtering logs or your content filtering policies for each funding year, okay? So what that means is you have a content filter for minor library patrons, not for your adults, for your minors, okay? What USAC is going to want to say, an auditor is going to want to see, is that you pull that record at least once during a funding year. Anytime that you receive E-rate funding, you need to have a copy of that log. Now, the filtering log can just be something that comes out of it, just a standard report that comes out of your content filter. That might be difficult for some library systems. If you can't do that, then just a listing of the policies that are enforced. So, for example, X library, wherever, one of the filtering policies is, they do not allow any pornography or nudity or violence or stuff like that. Having that listed is also helpful. I would say that as a minimum standard of what you need to retain. But get in the habit of pulling it at least once a year. Pick 1 month in the year. I don't care which one it is. Pull it and retain it for 10 years or more. That's going to make you so much more audit ready, so to speak. Okay. Got some questions. Oh yeah, here's your resources. Okay, the first one is us, E-Rate Central. We have a great deal of information on our website, going even back to like the orders and stuff like that. So if you're looking for something, check our website. We've got a lot of good resources on there. USAC, their website here. I would recommend signing up for the E-Rate News Brief. That's going to give you information as to when things are coming out, when windows are opening, things of that nature. The eligible services list, if you go to this is going to be a document that's going to show you, okay, what is eligible, what is not eligible, okay? We didn't talk about EPC, E-Rate Productivity Center, and we did that by design. That can get hairy. We'll talk about it on our next webinar, okay? So if you have any questions about EPC or navigating EPC, we'll do those next month. And then lastly, the Client Services Center, right? So if you have a general question or need help with something, you can give this line a call, and they'll for the most part help you out. They'll try to help you out. Okay, so with that being said, let me go back, to any questions. I think I got one. Oh, yep, thank you. The E-Rate Central newsletter is very helpful. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate that. Yeah, we our Wynn Hemsworth, one of our directors, he puts that together religiously every week. So. All right. Oh, there we go. So our next webinar, October 6th, go ahead and pencil it in. We'll talk about E-Rate procurement in the Form 470. I'll also say, let's see, what else is going up? The administrative window, this will be an opportunity for you guys to go into Epic and update your entities. For example, if you're going to be adding or closing library branches, it'll be a good opportunity to go in there and update that. That window, I think, will open on October 25th or 26th or something like that. I'll have more information for you by our next webinar. Okay. Last thing. I think Becky mentioned at the top of the hour. We'll make this slide deck available to everybody as well. All right. Becky, you want to send us off? Oh no, I'm sorry. We got chat. I'm sorry. Okay. Let's see. Oh yeah. Don't forget. Yeah. Do the today's evaluation.
Yeah, I put a couple links in there. I put the link to the next webinar for registration. I put that in the chat for people, and I put the link for the evaluation for today's webinar. If you guys could just take a moment and fill that out for us, it's always helpful. Other than that, thank you so much, Andrew, for joining us and presenting on E-Rate 101 today. And we look forward to the October 6th webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks. Y'all take care.